Now, as we keep an eye on Zimbabwe in the wake of the country's decision to issue new low-denomination currencies, we open the discussion to aspects of the country's economy that have informed this decision and its efficiency so far. As discussed yesterday on the show, Zimbabweans finally have access to a new low-denomination currency that authorities hope will end chronic cash shortages, but banks have maintained an existing weekly withdrawal limit of about $20. Now, shortages of cash, foreign currency, fuel, and power are the most visible signs of the country's worst economic crisis since 2008, when hyperinflation forced it to drop its currency. With me to dissect the realities of the current situation in Zimbabwe is Kudzai Gumumyu, an agribusiness finance expert with experience spanning Nigeria and Zimbabwe. He recently published his first book, which is titled Hard-Boiled Egg Index: Surviving Zimbabwe's Hyperinflation. Kudzai, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me. So we're seeing some situations that mirror the time in 2008 when Zimbabwe hit some astronomical numbers when it came to hyperinflation, and of course the situation that eventually led to the country dropping its own currency. How many of these sort of indices and certain things, when we look at the checklist, are we checking off to a situation where Zimbabwe might find itself exactly in the same economic situation of 2008?
I would say 2008 was out of this world in terms of inflation. Inflation hit a peak of 89.76 trillion %, and that is 21 zeros after a figure.
And if I started counting those 21 zeros, we might not finish this show.
So currently we have inflation which is sitting at about 300. But there are telltale signs that things are getting worse than they were when a new currency was introduced. In fact, for now, I don't really think it's a new currency, because Zimbabwe introduced what was called an RTGS dollar, which has been traded, and there was actually cash which was being withdrawn, and there were also cash issues. So what I'm seeing now being introduced is just more liquidity in terms of cash into the system for people to be able to withdraw their money out of the banks.
So you talk about more liquidity into the system, and we keep hearing about cash shortage. But one of the issues prior to what happened when the country first basically took its own currency off the shelf was that there was so much liquidity. There was so much cash in a way flowing around the system. And this reintroduction, or you're saying it's not completely a new currency, but with the RTGS dollar, with these low denomination currency now, are we not afraid that we might flood the Zimbabwe system with too much valueless or very low value currency?
If you look at what happened in 2008, where there was overprinting of the Zimbabwean dollar, which resulted in too much money chasing too few goods, and that resulted in a lot of inflation. Currently, we have a situation in Zimbabwe where there is low productivity, there are power issues, industries are not working, and if you are going to add more liquidity into a shrinking economy, definitely it's going to cause inflation. Whether it's going to be at the level of 2008, we still to see. But the fact is, people were having serious problems accessing cash at the banks, and people were sleeping in queues to access that cash. And mind you, people are now using mostly mobile money in Zimbabwe. Having cash is for that convenience in case one fails to transact.
It's a fallback plan.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so let's look at the long-term, both the immediate and the long-term implications to Zimbabwe's economy of this sort of continuous alteration of the currency. What do you think it means for Zimbabweans and for the economy as well, when you see whether any administration, whoever is in power, attempting to just handle the situation and introduce RTGS dollar, remove the American dollar, put the yuan in, put this one back in? What does this all mean?
It all means there is more risk for investors. And for me, if you look at the currency and with the policy flip-flopping that has been happening, we all know that capital is timid, and it flees at the slightest risk, even rumor or slightest appearance of risk.
Yeah.
So investors ordinarily would be wary of investing in an economy where there are changes in policy here and there. But yeah, Zimbabwe is a country that's so attractive in terms of resources, in terms of agriculture, in terms of even its human capacity. We just need to have a lot more predictability in terms of our policy, such that an investor, if they come in, they know they can make money and make a profit out of their investment. Otherwise, if people are going to lose money because of policy changes, they are unlikely to invest.
And they'll definitely run with their money. Now, in your book, Hard-Boiled Egg Index, you shared, and I'll quote, as rampaging inflation continued unabated, the impact on the economy was brutal and tragicomic at the same time. At one point, people would fill a traveler's bag with cash and come out of a shop holding the item in their hands. What was the impact to the economy of this situation you were describing? And are you seeing that again, coming up again?
If you look at what happened, it's, when money loses value, the smaller denominations are the ones that are impacted most.
Yes.
Let's say you were able to buy, let's say, $2. You were able to use $2 to buy 2 kg of rice. But suddenly that 2 kg of rice becomes
0.5 kg
let's say
rice.
$300.
Oh, wow, yeah.
So you now need
more
$2 notes to buy that 2 kg of rice. So you would have a lot of $2 notes to go and buy that rice. And so people were now using these smaller denominations to go and buy, and it was very inconvenient. It was very inconveniencing to the general public. The cost of doing business was going up because people have got to move a lot more bulky cash. So those things affected people in a bad way. Imagine if you are going to get into a bus and you've got a bag full of money to pay just for your fare. It was something that was very inconveniencing. But the government tried to solve that by printing higher denomination notes.
Oh, wow.
And that sort of fueled even higher inflation. And that culminated in the printing of the highest denomination in the world ever at $100 trillion.
Yeah.
And I remember people just then refused to use that $100 trillion note because it was not worth the money, the value.
It was printed on. Okay, we're going to wrap up, but I have two very quick questions that I think we definitely need to get to. And the first one is this. Looking at how this has been reported, both locally, on the continent, and internationally, do you think that there has been any sensationalization of the situation in Zimbabwe? Or has the true economic situation for the average Zimbabwean truly been reflected in how it's been reported?
If you look at the reporting in Zimbabwe, there is no doubt that there are economic challenges on the ground. In terms of money printing, I think if it were done in any other country, it wouldn't make news. Okay. But it's making news in Zimbabwe because of the history of what happened in Zimbabwe, where money lost value. I'll give you, for example, in 1980, one Zimbabwean dollar was equivalent to about 1.5 US dollars. By 2008, and when the Zim dollar was finally decommissioned, it was decommissioned at 1 US dollar to 35 quadrillion Zimbabwean dollars. And that came after Zimbabwe had debased the currency by 13 zeros. I don't know whether you...
No, I'm getting it, and I'm just thinking to myself, somebody watching us at home and hearing these figures and numbers be like, what are you... So a currency can lose so much value to that point. So let's move the situation, the conversation forward very quickly. We see the administration of President Emerson Mnangagwa really struggling to get a handle on this. If you were to advise them 1, 2, 3 things that they would do to find a way to start really putting things in place that would sort of move Zimbabwe out of this situation, what would you advise?
There is need to increase productivity in Zimbabwe. The country has the backbone still intact. There is need to encourage businesses to invest in Zimbabwe, and that comes through making sure that the risk of investing in Zimbabwe is reduced. In fact, we need to attract investment. So there is need for incentives to be put in place for people to invest in Zimbabwe. If that is done, and that is through the right policies, that is through also making sure there is ease of doing business in the country, and also get a lot more predictable in terms of your policies. You cannot be changing policies here and here. You cannot be changing policies again and again, because that affects people who are investing, and that affects their plans. So there is need for a lot more predictability in terms of government policy. And I believe also if there can be oneness in terms of the politics in the country, the opposition and the government, if they can come up with if they can come up with a solution where they can work together for the benefit of the country, I believe divided we fall, and united we stand.
All right, thank you so much. A fantastic note to end this conversation on. We've been talking to Kudzai Gumumyu, who is an agribusiness finance expert with experience spanning both Nigeria and Zimbabwe, looking at the current situation of the currency and, of course, the economy of Zimbabwe as well.